Hello and welcome to Useful Idiots. This is Matt Taibbi, and I'm.
Now you have me confused. I'm Katie Halper. Is that my line?
Oh no, you say I say this is Matt Taibbi, and then you say and this is Katie Halper,
Oh,
or
and this
that
is
is
Katie
Katie Halper.
Halper,
If you want a
and
Katie
that is
Halper identify, you wouldn't be the first. That's fine.
that's true. I can do that too. I'm Halper fluid.
Halper fluid, yeah. I'm
Yeah.
on the Taibbi spectrum myself.
We have a lot of stuff to get to in this show. When we have a great guest,
yes,
a very appropriate guest. Who did 2 tours as an officer in Afghanistan, Adrian Bonenberger.
Also a matchmaker. Just kidding.
Also, he could be.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah.
That's what we got to start doing on the show. Every person who looks like they have cool friends,
right?
Ask
just
for setup.
Serve it up.
Yeah.
Give us a list before you come on.
Yes, before you even get booked.
Right. Yeah, exactly. That's the carrying charge. Obviously, a lot of stuff about Afghanistan this week. It's still kind of the big thing in the news. It's just the whole thing's just a mess. I guess we'll get to it.
Yeah, we'll get to it. It's such a shit show.
But we'll talk about that.
But it's a positive shit show. Like it's being spread as it's being spun as a totally negative shit show as opposed to like an inevitable shit show. And I was actually listening to Democracy Now! Where they're like, in Afghanistan, where the US has evacuated nearly 60,000 people.
Right.
Which is not, of course, how, I mean, Monday morning, Matt wasn't here. Matt has been on vacation. So welcome back, by the way. And Matt
I'm still on vacation. But
he's still, right. That's why he has that New Englandian background.
Right.
But we talked about this a lot and how the framing, it's just the premise is just baked in there, is that this is awful and there are not enough people who have been, evacuated. And like, what's the standard? I mean, for all we know, well, you actually do know this, but there's no standard by which people are, like, I don't know what the metric is. It's just apparently bad.
It's funny because I think there's the criticisms coming from different directions. There's clearly kind of this right-wing neoliberal criticism that's sort of uniform, that just is blasting. I think their strategy is just to sort of blast the incompetence of it and to suggest that the deadline should be extended, and then kind of shoehorn in an argument later on that maybe our presence should be a little bit longer generally.
I feel like there's one argument is actually just like pro-war. It's not on like MSNBC, right? But there's some people on the right. I guess, well, does anyone want us to openly want us to stay, right?
Not openly, but
not openly, right? So that's the thing. There are people who actually want to stay. Then there are people who are doing the like, oh, it's just the execution of it.
Right.
And those people, some of them are cynical and want us to stay and are pretending that it's about the execution of it. Then you have the classically cynical, human rights, women's rights. But then the problem is you get people who in good faith are making those arguments because they hear them.
Yeah, I mean, I think the way you deal with that is you say the true thing and the surprising thing, which is that Joe Biden is sticking by this deadline, which I'm really surprised by.
Yeah, me too.
This is somebody who was like the most aggressive Democrat about going into Iraq. Clearly, in terms of his actual belief system, he was very into us going there. Maybe they've had a change of heart. Maybe they've had a come to Jesus moment about the realities of what can be accomplished there. Although I hate putting it that way because it was never about that, I don't think.
Right.
But they're sticking to this withdrawal, which I think he deserves a lot of credit for. However, there's no question that they completely screwed up this operation, and I think they did it because they believed their own press clippings about how much control they had over various parts of the country, because they've been systematically lying to themselves about all sorts of things, which we're going to get to, by the way. Adrian has a lot of stories about that. So yeah, it's been a mess. Yeah, I think you have to give them some credit for sticking to the withdrawal, but they're not immune to criticism for screwing this up.
So you're saying and we'll talk about this more with the actual person who's a veteran, but you're saying like the execution was problematic, but the media's critique of it is mostly disingenuous.
I think so.
From people who just didn't want to pull out anyway.
Yeah, and I think on some level they want to go back, or they want to set the stage for staying longer in other places. Right. This was going to be a mess no matter what.
Right. That's the thing. Yeah.
And the thing is, they just could have done this differently. Like when you have to send troops back to secure the airport, that automatically means that you guessed wrong about how this was going to go. So that's bad.
Right. But they could be sounding the alarm, so to speak, in a way that was less pro-war.
Yeah. I mean, yeah,
closetedly pro-war. Yeah.
You could sell it in a bunch of different ways. Yeah. And clearly a lot of it's funny how a lot of the Republicans sort of reverted back to 2004 era pro-interventionist cheerleading as soon as it started to go wrong. But yeah, I mean, everybody's doing it, I guess. So.
Right. Like you mean when Biden was president, like before they were like anti-war, anti-endless wars, and now they're like.
Well, in the Trump era, I think there was a little bit of that. You started to see, we should give Trump credit for not starting new wars. And there was a little bit of, we should give Trump credit for deciding to pull out of Afghanistan and blah, blah, blah.
Right.
But as soon as Biden started to screw up with the withdrawal, I think a lot of that rhetoric sort of dried up.
Right. And the same people who were giving Trump like not very due. I mean, he was not ideologically endless wars, but he did, Soleimani, Syria.
Oh, the bombing, the droning, all that stuff. Yeah.
But I'm saying the haters of Biden were very much like, boo, endless war. And then once Biden announced the pullout, all of a sudden they were like, boo, this is being done poorly.
Right.
It's weird to be like cheering for Biden, kind of. I mean, allowing for the criticism of his ineptitude, but yeah.
Yeah, there's all kinds of stuff that is weird about him and Harris. Like she had a couple of odd moments this past week as well. But look, it's very unusual to see the government sticking to a withdrawal timeline.
Yeah.
I mean, because they've been blowing them off for so long. Right. Including his former boss, Barack Obama, did it repeatedly, right? So
this is the moment that Biden became presidential.
That's right. Who was it? Was that Fareed Zakaria or was that
Van Jones?
Van Jones. It was both of them.
Yeah. Both, yeah.
Yeah.
They should have a show together called Becoming Presidential.
Right. Vankaria.
Yeah, I like that, Vankaria, yeah.
So what do we have for Democrat Suck this week?
So for Democrat Suck, I thought we would talk about Biden's decision it's kind of a double whammy. Biden's decision to nominate Rahm Emanuel to be, do you know what he's going to be, what he nominated him for? Do you know this, Matt? Okay.
No,
off the top of your head. Guess what? Guess what position?
Secretary of Awesomeness. I don't know what is it?
He already is that. Ambassador. Guess which country?
Ambassador. It's not Afghanistan, is it?
No, that would be amazing. Wilson, do you mind showing the tweet?
Japan.
Yeah. So James, here's the double whammy, because not only did Biden nominate Rahm Emanuel, who we'll discuss a little bit in a second, for the ambassador of Japan, but James E. Clyburn, who calls himself the most progressive Democrat, supported President Biden's nomination. He tweeted, "I support President Biden's nomination of my former colleague, Rahm Emanuel, to be ambassador to Japan. I worked closely with him in Congress, and when he served as chief of staff to President Obama, he has the experience necessary to advance our country's strategic objectives." Now, if we could just play that clip of Clyburn describing his own politics.
Well, let me say this. There ain't nobody in the Democratic Party of the United States of America that's more progressive than Jim Clyburn. Nobody. I met my late wife in jail protesting the status quo. John Lewis and I, you would not call John not progressive. But John would never yell, "Burn, baby, burn." John would never say defund the police. As progressive as he was. And I'm just as progressive as anybody else.
More progressive. The most progressive. Well, there's nobody more progressive than him. So he's at least a top-ranking progressive person. If not the most progressive, he's among the most progressive, right? This is just a fuck you to the people of Chicago, to progressives. It's like you had one job to do, Joe Biden. Well, you had a couple, but one of them was like just not nominating like Rahm Emanuel. It's like with the New York Times thing, like nominate people who aren't overtly evil.
Right.
Like nominate someone who's just as bad, but isn't just such a fuck you or finger in the eye to progressives. A lot of people have been demanding that Biden not name Rahm Emanuel to, for instance, Department of Transportation. You know, as much as I kind of like the idea that he won't be in this, he'll be spending more time abroad. It's just, again, it's just so off. It's such a fuck you.
That's not abroad enough. Like if they really want to do it, do it
right.
like the ambassador to Neptune or something like that. You
Yeah,
know
you're
what I
right.
mean? Have him in a tight orbit. You know?
Yeah, I could just imagine him actually. Couldn't you imagine him in a spacesuit? Rahm Emanuel?
Exactly. Right.
Like rotating. But he, you know, it's just so gross to watch like Clyburn sell himself as this civil rights icon, voice for civil rights, when, you know, among the many terrible things that Rahm Emanuel did was that he covered up the police murder of Laquan McDonald, who was a 17-year-old young black man. He
wouldn't have been found out without a FOIA request or a court order or whatever.
Yes,
something like
right.
that. Yeah.
It was hidden from public view until ordered by a judge to share with the public. You know, he's just done. He shut down most of the mental health clinics, or he slashed the budget for mental health clinics in Chicago. He eliminated the city's Department of Environment, which caused an uptick of lead in water. He was terrible on teaching and education. You know, he was a big like private contractors and schools standards and curriculum, charter schools. So he's not good. And also, we know, according to Barack Obama, he urged him to kill more people.
Well, his whole tenure as chief of staff was like expanding the
droning program.
The droning program, you know, the assassination, the sort of legal pretext for that. Him and Leon Panetta were kind of instrumental in that whole side of Obama's presidency.
Which doesn't mean it's not a bitch move for Obama to blame assassination programs on someone else, but
yeah, no, the Rahm Emanuel thing is just trolling, frankly. Well, Nero was more trolling. The Nero thing was just a flat out fuck you to the Bernie people. Not sure. There's probably all sorts of other horse trading going on with the Rahm appointment.
So yeah, so it's trolling. You're saying it's just trolling?
Yeah, I mean, Rahm is probably less overtly trolling than Nero, but it's trolling a little bit. It's like, we can do this.
Who's going to stop us?
Right, exactly.
He's such an unlikable fellow.
Your spider sense goes off with him, like he's into something really weird in his private life, like, you know, hanging himself in this like autoerotic asphyxiation or something like that.
Well, we know he leaves fish heads on his enemy's doormat.
Well, I mean, we all do that. So
who doesn't? Yeah, right, we'd all like to.
Yeah, exactly.
He's missing a finger or something. Not that I hold that against him. Did he skate over it or something? I think he skated over it.
His own finger?
Wait, yes. Hold on.
That's hard to do. I almost admire that.
I went to school with someone who did that, actually. No, I think maybe her dad skated over it. You know what? He probably didn't. You're right. He probably didn't skate over it. Hold on. Let me check.
It was snapped off in an orifice.
While a high school student working part-time at an Arby's, Emanuel severely cut his middle finger on a meat slicer. Whoops. Sorry, I was totally off. Which was later infected from swimming in Lake Michigan. His finger was partially amputated due to the severity of the infection. Okay, so I'm kind of impressed he worked at an Arby's.
Yeah.
That's much more like working class than I thought he was.
And I guess if you're going to lose a piece of a finger, doing it at Arby's is probably the best way.
It's like an honorary place.
What would be some of the dishonorable ways to lose a finger?
Well, skating over it, which I made up. I didn't actually lie. I got confused. You know why I thought that? Because he was a ballet dancer. So I combined the ballet.
Well, maybe he was ballet dancing in Arby's.
I combined the fact that he was a ballet dancer with the fact that there was a body of water, and I put that to made the skating. Right.
No, that's understood. That's understood. As long as he wasn't ballet dancing in Arby's, I think yeah, we can let that go. So
well, maybe that's a true story.
Maybe. Moving from Rahm Emanuel to Republican suck, there are obviously a lot of candidates this week. I didn't want to do the legislative stuff because some of that is complicated. I just don't want to get into it. But
boring.
It's boring. Also, this is classic. Here's Newsmax. You know, in the middle of this Afghan crisis. Here's a Newsmax reporter. And obviously this isn't Republicans, it's just conservatives, but you know, we do that every now and then.
I think they tend to vote Republican, these guys.
Yeah. So Matt, if we could just see the video from this one commentary on Newsmax.
Bringing potentially hundreds of thousands of Afghanis to America. This is a terrible idea. Now, we should learn from the disastrous experience Europe had with Afghani men and systemic sex crimes against women. Just a few weeks ago,
I think he means Afghan. I did that too.
Was raped and murdered in Austria, and 3 Afghani migrants have been charged with that heinous crime. And because of that crime, Austrian Chancellor Kurz, he made it clear just this weekend that Austria will not accept any Afghan refugees. Statistics show, as I detail in my new op-ed, that terrible case in Austria, it is hardly isolated. It's not just an outlier. It's the worst example, but it's not an outlier. Police numbers show the relatively small Afghan population there in Austria commits an astounding half of all sexual assaults in that country. According to the Hoover Institution at Stanford, according to their research, once the giant wave of Afghan migration to Austria began in 2015, total sexual assaults there grew by a staggering 53% over the next 4 years. As the Wall Street Journal reports, next door in Germany, foreign-born residents right now account for 1/3 of all sex crime suspects. Now, given these realities in Europe, is the mass migration of Afghan men to America really a good idea? Good for your wife, your daughter?
So yeah, that was the line. Good for your wife, good for your daughter. Like this is the whole like they're bringing rapists thing.
Right. It's kind of woke because it's not just Mexicans.
That's true, right? Yes, they're being it's sort of more. It's sort of an intersectional. Yeah. The one thing this little soliloquy leaves out is that if we were to have an influx of Afghan immigrants, they would be fleeing a disaster we created in their country. You know, that's kind of a consideration that you might want to add in there.
It makes it sound like they're just like prowling the world.
Right.
Just
yeah.
like
They were scheming to get in, to get their hands on where the white women at kind of a thing. Right. So I don't know. That's just classic in the middle of this crisis to go there, right, is kind of amazing. Although I guess it's not to it's very on brand. Do you think that was surprising or no?
No, not really.
Yeah.
I mean, I was a little surprised about the Afghani thing only because I thought like he'd have a script that he would have submitted to someone and they would have checked and said Afghan, not Afghani. But
right. Yes. Yeah. No.
But maybe if they probably wouldn't have wanted to correct him. Honestly, it's like a badge of honor to, these colors don't bleed.
Right. Yeah. Exactly. All that stuff.
But wait until, by the way, he finds out what things that some soldiers do to women.
Yep. Surprisingly, not all of them are positive.
Yeah. Surprisingly. Yeah.
All right. So that happened. So what do we have for Isn't That Weird? Mm-hmm.
So for Isn't That Weird, I actually stole a would-be Isn't That Terrible because I gave you a really good Isn't That Terrible. I don't know if you saw that. The Isn't That Terrible that I gave you. Oh yeah. I gave you a really good one. Sorry. Did you see it? I think
you did. Yes. I think we're talking about the same thing. But anyway, go. Yeah.
So for the Isn't That Weird, shout out to Matt Wilson, actually, who found this story. It's a sad story. So it's almost a terrible, but it's weird enough. And I think a lot of people are going to really enjoy this, though, because it brings up a lot of ethical questions. It's not quite necrophilia level breakthrough analysis, but it's good. So reading at People magazine, Belgian woman banned from zoo after 4-year quote unquote affair with chimpanzee.
Okay, wait, I got to interrupt you quickly.
Yeah.
I got to level my protest over this headline, but we're going to get into that. Okay, right. Go ahead. Yeah.
Well, do you want to level it now or?
Well, I think it promises more than it delivers, but go ahead.
Well, yeah, but I mean, whose fault is that? That's Addie's fault.
That's true. All
right. So here's why. Yes, it's not quite. So Addie Timmermans is banned from coming in contact with a chimpanzee at the Antwerp Zoo in Belgium.
A Belgian zoo is making headlines after it banned a local woman from visiting the park's chimpanzee exhibit due to her, quote, affair with one of the primates. A chimpanzee named Cheetah arrived at the Antwerp Zoo 30 years ago, and over the past 4 years, Addie Timmermans has visited every week, developing a close bond with the animal. According to Newsweek, Timmermans said this: I love that animal, and he loves me. I haven't got anything else. Why do they want to take that away? She went on to add, quote, we are having an affair, I'll just say. According to the outlet, the affair Timmermans mentioned involved the two waving and blowing kisses to each other from opposite sides of the primate's enclosure. The zoo recently claimed their lengthy relationship is negatively impacting cheetah's rapport with the zoo's other chimpanzees, causing them to ignore him and not consider him part of their group. A spokesperson for the facility said an animal that is too focused on people is less respected by its peers, and they've banned Timmermans from making contact to prioritize his well-being. Zookeepers are now working to help cheetah learn to interact with his fellow primates.
Yeah, so it's a you can't stop our love kind of a thing.
Yeah,
right?
that's bullshit. I'm sorry. Look, they have once a week they see each other. I mean, okay, I'm gonna level with everyone and say it's not a good idea, Addie. Don't say you're having an affair. Why would you do that? Why would you say that? You're setting yourself up and you say you have nothing else going on in your life. So you don't pretend. First of all, you're over-promising. Second of all, you're just making yourself look like a criminal, and you're not. There's nothing sexual. It's a bond. And the zoo is being unreasonable because if they wanted to, they're doing a bad job socializing cheetah. What kind of zookeepers are they? What kind of chimp keepers are they? And maybe, okay, fine. You don't have to be extreme. Maybe Addie can only come once a month, but to go expect her to go cold turkey, cold chimp. You're welcome, everyone out there. Didn't plan that. That's just too much.
Yeah.
That's just cruel. And why can't they have a friendship?
Right.
I don't buy it. I don't buy it. I think someone hates. I think this is a personal beef. It's Antwerp.
It's jealousy.
It's jealousy. I feel like someone's like, there's like some kind of family, or maybe it is jealousy, but she did say, I love that animal and he loves me. I haven't got anything else. Why do they want to take that away? We're having an affair, I'll just say.
Very Edgar Allan Poe, Annabelle Lee, like our forbidden love, like the heavens wouldn't allow it.
Yeah.
The winged seraphs are judging us.
It's cruel and unusual.
I think you're
right.
right.
As is the habit.
She sold that wrong,
Terrible. Yeah, really bad PR on Addie's part.
Right. I don't have anything else. Like, I think you should have just played it cool. Like I do this with every chimpanzee. Like,
exactly. Why pathologize your very close friendship with a chimpanzee? Why are you going to make it sound weird or desperate? I mean, she's selling it wrong on both levels, on a PR level and also for Cheetah. Because if I'm Cheetah, I'm not going to want to hang out with you anymore. I hope Cheetah doesn't read this or catch wind of this.
Well, yeah. Probably he's not going to like the blowback on social media. I mean, just let them hang out.
Yeah,
let them
they don't even
like
touch
each other's photos, right?
Yeah,
yes.
Right. Let them blow each other kisses. That's very cute. That's so cute. And part of what makes this complicated is that Cheetah's already predisposed to be fascinated with humans because he was a pet before joining the facility. So he was already kind of like, so don't put this on Addie.
Yeah, exactly. Don't put it on Addie and don't be like, oh, it's harming his socialization. Like that already happened. He's already damaged goods. Make the best of a bad situation.
Together. Yeah, exactly. She has nothing else going on in her life. He has inappropriate boundaries with animals.
Right.
So I think honestly, they are getting in the way of their love. And even it sounds pretty platonic. Again, I don't know why she called it an affair.
Yeah, I mean, they haven't even gotten to second base.
I don't think so. It depends how long the chimp's arms are, though. To be fair, we don't know. Yeah, we don't know exactly. It's a cute chimp too. Anyway, so that's isn't that weird?
It is. That is a weird story. I appreciated that when I saw that. That is a classic of the genre.
But it's interesting. Just really quickly, what's interesting about that is it's the reverse of what we usually see, which is where people downplay the romantic nature.
Yes.
Anyway, and this is their upplaying. It's not actually there.
Okay, so moving on to Isn't That Terrible? I'm pretty sure this is the one you're talking about. This is the story that I believe you gave me, Katie. It's from the New York Post. And Matt, if we can call this up.
It's so bad.
Man dies after having sex using epoxy adhesive instead of a condom.
What the fuck?
Now, I think as most of the people who follow the show know that I'm very harsh on reporters who do this kind of story and don't put a pun in the lead.
Yeah.
And so here's one where somebody died. It's tragic. and yet the author still went there in the lead. So if we can read the lead sentence, it's his prophylactic resulted in fatal organ failure.
Faux, F-A-U-X.
Prophylactic,
right? Yeah.
Yes. Police are probing the bizarre case of a 25-year-old Indian man, exactly, who suddenly died after using a high-powered epoxy resin instead of a condom before having sex. They used the adhesive, quote, they used the adhesive to avoid pregnancy, a local investigator told the Times of India of the prophylactic fiasco, which occurred June 22nd at a hotel in Ahmedabad, Gujarat. According to a senior Ahmedabad city police officer, Salman Misra of Fatawadi and his unnamed ex-fiancée were captured on closed-circuit television security footage entering the fatal flophouse in the Juhapura neighborhood of Ahmedabad. Several witnesses said that Mirza, along with his former fiancée, both of whom were addicted to drugs, had gone to a hotel. Quote, there, they applied an epoxy adhesive on his private parts as they were not carrying any protection. In addition to sealing off Mirza's manhood, the couple also mixed the epoxy with, quote, whitener and inhaled the mixture for a, quote, kick, News 18 reported. The lovebirds' acquaintances told an official the doomed duo were intoxicated from the chemical cocktail at the time of the ill-fated hookup. The following day, Mirza's acquaintance discovered the man lying unconscious in shrubs near his apartment, near an apartment complex, whereupon he took him home, according to the Times of India. His condition deteriorated rapidly. Police report that Mirza died due to multiple organ failure caused by the MacGyver-style contraceptive. Meanwhile, the man's friends suspected he might have lost consciousness while abusing the chemical, and the counterfeit condom only accelerated his demise. So it kind of goes on from there, but a condom's pretty much got to be a solid, unbroken thing, right?
I mean, I'm torn because on the one hand, it's like he was acting responsibly within a very, do you know what I mean? I mean, he wasn't responsible because it was a not only was it a non-condom, it was a very dangerous thing to put on yourself, but like, and this is a very sad story. And I feel very bad for this person and all of his relatives and friends, but what's in your head when you're like, I want to do the right thing. I don't want to get someone pregnant. I'm going to be responsible and I'm gonna put an epoxy on my penis and inhale it for an extra. And epoxy on both your houses being face and penis. Yeah, I feel bad, but this is sort of classic Darwin Award behavior. Yeah, and the friend took him to the house. I feel like that's a direct to hospital intervention. Yes. So maybe he didn't know. He just found him in shrubs. Maybe he didn't know. How did he find him? Oh, good question. Yeah, also, good question. What did the epoxy harden in that shape? Oh, wow. That they should put, if they cremate him, they should put, that could be like an urn. That's right. It could be the receptacle in which they hold the remains. Right. Yeah. It's a little plaster caster-ish. I mean, remember that was the big fad 60s rock stars did this. Right. I actually didn't know what that was until the show, and I had to ask you what that meant. Yeah. Yeah, but I'm pretty sure they didn't use a toxic chemical that was also used as a drug. Right. To give you an extra, I think if you're taking drugs to the level where you're huffing the stuff you put on your penis to prevent contraception, you probably need a different dealer, I think, at that point. Yeah, and the whitener. What kind of self-loathing? That just makes it even more tragic. That's colorism. You throw colorism into the mix as if you needed more. Right. Yeah, that is messed up. But that is a good rule of thumb, right? So never put on your penis something that you're using. I mean, well, if the goal is contraception and not death, don't put something on your penis that you're getting high off of. I think there's probably some herbal, there may be something in nature that's like you can get high off of and make some kind of prophylactic off of, but you know, it's on you guys, Useful Idiots fans. Let us know. Yeah, let us know. Let us know what that is, and if you've done it. And if you've done it, and if you've survived, and if you haven't survived, you can't let us know unless You have some kind of suit. Well, remember one of ours isn't that terrible was a guy who like I think killed a girlfriend and then involved time travelers. Oh, thought that you could undo it or something.
Oh, that's
Anyway,
right. Yeah.
throwback to
Yeah.
callback. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't think there's any time travel involved in this. Like you can't.
No,
there's
I
no,
mean, you
there's,
could-
there's no takesy
No.
backsies with this.
No, I just thought you could tweet from heaven or hell.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, that was terrible. Like I mean,
That was
it was
terrible.
terrible. I gotta give a shout out to the New York Post reporter here, Ben Cost. That's pretty cold to put a pun in the lead on a story like that where a guy dies.
But not in the header.
It's not in the header. That's true.
The head.
The head.
The head.
Yeah, just the tip.
Just a tip. Exactly.
Right. Okay, so that was the 4 food groups this week.
Let's bring on our guest, shall
Right,
we?
let's bring on our guest. And this is someone who I've known for a long time, writer and former U.S. Army captain, Adrian Bonenberger.
Who you can follow on Twitter at Adrian Bonenberger.
That's right. Right, exactly. He wrote a really good book called Afghan Post. He's got a new one out called The Disappointed Soldier. Adrian and I talked a few months ago for an interview on my site about kind of the prospective withdrawal. And at the time I asked him, do you think they're really going to do it? And he said that he was going to do the full Charlie Brown kick the football thing and actually believe that they would. So I'm sure he's happy that they're actually doing it, but he probably also has some pretty pointed observations about our time there and about the withdrawal. So he's kind of the perfect guest to interview about this whole mess. Let's talk to Adrian Bonenberger. Welcome, Adrian Bonenberger, to Useful Idiots. Thanks so much for coming on. Obviously, you and I have known each other for a long time. For people who aren't familiar with your work and your past, could you tell us a little bit about your background and how long you served in Afghanistan and in what capacity and that sort of thing?
Well, I guess the first thing to say is I'm a classic useful idiot. Perfect for the show from that perspective. Yeah, so I was in the Army from 2005 to 2012. I was an infantry officer. I did 2 deployments to Afghanistan, one in 2007 to 2008 with 173rd Airborne, one from 2010 to 2011 with the 10th Mountain Division. And since that time, I went into journalism. I actually saw one of the things that sort of inspired me to get into journalism was, the journalists were some of the only people who were even making, any kind of attempt on honesty. And they were recording things that nobody else seemed to care about at the time. And it felt like something that, would be a good way to contribute to society or the world. So when I got out, I wrote my war memoirs, Afghan Post, went to Columbia Journalism School, and then ended up well, that didn't end up. I made an effort to go to Ukraine for a couple of years to cover the conflict there, which was the last time I think I was a useful idiot, because it's very easy to be spun when you go to Ukraine or Russia. And, I covered some of the nationalist militias there, looking back on things, much more fairly than they deserved. And so it's easy to get sucked into that type of thing. But yeah, it's a real honor to be on the program. I really appreciate it. And
no, of course. Yeah, no, you and I talked just a few months ago, and at the time, we were just sort of looking ahead at the sort of planned withdrawal. And you were talking in general about some of the things that you've seen, but I haven't heard your thoughts on the withdrawal, the pullout, the execution of everything in the last month. So I was wondering if you could just start there. I mean, there's a lot of stuff I want to get into about what your deployment, what you saw while you were there, because that's fascinating. But what's been your take on, the city events of the last 2-3 weeks?
The last 2 or 3 weeks have been really awful. When Kabul fell on Sunday, a buddy of mine was actually still there. He was Brian Kastner, who's a great writer, and he's with Amnesty International. I wasn't sure if he was trying to make his way to the airport, and then he made his way to the airport and got out. And that's one little story. That's a story about, a guy I know, a friend of mine who I cared about. There's tens of thousands of stories like that with people who are in far greater danger Afghans who have a target on their back. And I don't think I don't think he'd mind me saying that, like, I was really worried about him getting out. But, that's very much the tip of the iceberg. There are people in far worse conditions than that. I've been trying to get an interpreter from my first deployment out for the last couple of weeks with little success. I don't know when this is getting put up, but only for that reason, I won't go into the details, but, people are starting to talk about what happens if you can't get, one of these SIVs processed in time. That's probably going to happen. That's going to affect tens of thousands of Afghans. So, I think when we talked last time, Matt, like, I'm still glad that we're withdrawing. We have no business in that country, like, period. That's the first and most important thing. Overdue withdrawal.
And your point was that we haven't had any since at least when bin Laden was taken out, right?
Yeah. Certainly. Yeah, that's the best narrative arc that anyone can come up with, is that, like, that's the last time we had even like a kind of shred of reason for being there, and since that time we've had no shreds.
Right.
So even like the illusion of a reason for being there evaporated. Whether or not that's actually the reason, there was no like even shell of a reason after that.
After 2011, shell, illusion, gone.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. What do you think happened here? Because I remember, again, you and I talked about how there was sort of a chronic misreporting or over-reporting of how in control the coalition forces were of various parts of the country, that they were under-reporting how much control the Taliban had over various parts. Do you think they actually got to the point of deceiving themselves? In terms of how easy this withdrawal would be, or like what happened there? Like I was a little confused about that.
I think that's exactly right. I think that's the only thing that explains what happened. I mean, these aren't people who who want people to die. And if you're making your calculus, if your calculus is, I know this thing is going to collapse in 2 to 3 months maximum, but I don't care. I mean, that's almost intentional harm. I think it really is just years of overly rosy reports, combined with nobody, taking the time to make an honest assessment of where the Afghans were. I know of 2 people out of the entire commentariat. I know of 2 people who were kind of lowballing the one, who were even saying it might not, the Afghan government might not last a year. They were saying, like 2 or 3 years ago, even, they were saying, I don't think the Afghan government can, I think it'll be a reach for them to hold on for a year. But they weren't saying less than 6 months, This is 2 months and change. So I think, a lot of the criticism, I know a lot of people will disagree with me here, the criticism of Biden, who is definitely, the administration is like lying now, and, not doing everything they can to get people who need to get out, who are going to die, probably. They got themselves into this situation, not through ill will, not through bad intel. I mean, like, everything said that this was the Afghanistan, the country as we knew it, was going to last for like at least a year, maybe 6 months to a year. On the outside, people who like don't get invited to any of the cool parties, they were saying 6 months to a year. Everybody else was saying a year to 3 years.
Wow.
If you were president, what would you have done? Like, let's say you got in when, I know this is kind of ridiculous, but if you had been elected president, got in when Biden got in, what would you have done differently? And then if you had done what Biden had done and it turned out the way it did, what would you have done differently at that point?
Answer to number 1 is nothing. Answer to number 2, and I think looking at things and having worked now with my congressman and, the State Department, and every friend that might have a connection to a congressman or the State Department, people who are still in the military, I would say the system is not set up to get people from Afghanistan or Russia or Mexico or China to America. It's set up to, really minimize the number of people coming into America. And there needs to be some type of capability that we can switch on, some emergency act or whatever, to put like the necessary people in the State Department to look at applications that we say, have some type of legal standing. SIVs in this particular case, and a particular visa that can be given to a person who's served America in a certain context. So what I would have done once things started heading south was to get on the phone and use my mighty pen to boost up the State Department to expedite these things. They've got flights leaving Kabul that are half full or less. You know, this isn't a seat problem. This is a problem of being able to just take people out of the crowd and say, get on the flight with your kids. You know, we've got a place for you to land. And that's a State Department problem. And whose fault is that? I mean, like, if we want to point fingers now, I think it's fair to say part of the fault of that is the Trump administration. You know, frankly, my wife is Ukrainian and she's a Ukrainian citizen. And we have been very slowly going through the process of getting her green card, going from a permanent resident to a green card to citizenship. And all of that halted last year for 18 months. There just weren't enough people to process in person the way it needed to be processed. So something that should have been like a 30 to 90 day guaranteed piece of paper in the mail became an 18-month, we'll get back to you when we have the bandwidth to do this. That's the State Department. That's immigration when you marry somebody, you know?
Yeah.
So I can only imagine the SIVs are probably like 8 dudes with their hair on fire, just being like, you know, yelled at by everybody in Washington, D.C. right now.
So you would have planned it the same way as he did,
Yep.
but it's just that this is the immigration issue, which is the thing that really needs to be addressed.
He hasn't responded well to this crisis. The planning, I agreed with all this planning, you know, withdraw from Afghanistan.
Right.
And I don't care what the generals are saying, you know, do it. It's been 20 years. But now once this crisis occurs, which whether it was manufactured, whether it was a thing that happened because people weren't paying attention, it doesn't matter. The crisis is here. What do we do about that? And as far as I can tell, there hasn't been a ton done to address the crisis. So I would have done that differently.
So you wrote about this obviously in Afghan Post, which is it's a really cool book. It's sort of an epistolary novel where you're telling the story of your deployment in letter form, like letters written home.
And journal entries.
Journal entries, yeah. But can you talk a little bit about like the sort of stages of your thinking when you were over there, like the first things that maybe were disillusioning for you when you got to Afghanistan? Obviously, we talked about some things like the contracting schemes, you know, the contractors having too much sway over command and too much influence over the missions. But what were some of the first things that you saw, and also where were you?
So my first deployment, I was in on the border of Pakistan in a place called Paktika province. It's just in one of these valleys that's ringed by mountains. People can shoot rockets at you pretty much at will. And that was a pretty bad deployment. It went from bad to worse over the course of the deployment. And my second deployment was in Kunduz, up on Kunduz province, which is in the north on the border of Tajikistan. And that was that deployment went from bad to good. And so at the same time that I was seeing many of those things that we discussed in our last talk, you know, I think probably most shockingly, looking back on things, the MRAP boondoggle, where we basically spent $50 billion to rent a fleet of vehicles that were then, you know, given or sold for tens or hundreds of thousands of dollars to police departments in the United States, or given to the Afghan military, which is now in the hands of the Taliban. Not good vehicles for the terrain. I was injured. I had a minor injury in a rollover when I was driving over a kind of a dirt road that collapsed because it wasn't constructed to carry 40,000 pounds. It was constructed to carry Humvees, the previous thing. Looking at a lot of those types of problems, I was able to obscure them a bit because my second deployment, it truly felt like the mission worked out well. And that was in the north, and that was in a place where it was hard for the Taliban to get to. And that was in a place where, I mean, I negotiated with the Taliban. Before every operation, we would have the mayor and the chief of police send out, you know, a message, talk to their Taliban friends or their Taliban acquaintances and say, we don't want to be fighting you. We would rather you be working for the government, you know, so lay down your arms, join us, and join in the effort. And they started doing that. And so by the time I left Afghanistan, it felt to me like there was some possibility for like compromise. The police and the army would be able to take care of themselves. And, of course, when you see something like that, it's easy for you to overlook all of the other, incidences of corruption or mismanagement or waste that otherwise were, all over the place. Fraud, waste, and abuse. FWA is what we called it.
So there is a universe where this could have worked out more smoothly, you think?
That's what I thought when we talked, but I'm not sure now. I don't know. I mean, now I wrote an essay for the Daily Beast talking about the lie of Afghanistan. And I also podcasted, actually the day Kabul fell, I podcasted with Patrick Wyman, who runs a podcast called The Tides of History. It's a history podcast,
Oh, yeah.
Really enjoyable. He was talking about the ways in which we didn't understand Afghanistan. And it was one of those things where talking with him, hearing him talk about, to them, and not just them, other cultures as well, like money and transactions don't mean the same thing. Like it's as important to them or more important that their uncle or father think well of them, or that their mother's sister, not be offended, than that they get $10,000 for moving a thing from point A to point B. And there was no willingness to see that. So I feel like actually, I was, again, title of the podcast, Useful Idiots. Like we were all blind, even those of us who, like myself, would like to think that we were paying attention. We're kind of deceiving ourselves about what was actually being accomplished there, as evidenced by the country collapsing in 6 days.
How did something like that, I don't know if you know off the top of your head, but because it sounds like a recent conversation, but is there a way that manifested? Like, how does that appreciation of cultural difference and their, holding the opinion of their relatives of themselves in high esteem versus money, how would that have determined your behavior?
So with the military, and this is something that, the military even has trouble. There can be misunderstandings between the military and between civilian populations in America, because the military is all about show up at this time in this uniform with this stuff. And they assume that everybody who's doing business with them is operating under those rules. And the US military, which again, going back to this podcast I did with Patrick Wyman, he said something really interesting to me that I hadn't considered before, which is that it's one of the only pieces of the American bureaucracy that works. And it works essentially the way it's supposed to because we throw so much money at it. I mean, it's overfunded. It under-delivers, but it delivers something, which, as I'm seeing right now, the State Department is actually very unusual in terms of American bureaucracy. And as a result of that, it gets to expect that other things will work the way it wants to. And in the context of Afghanistan, that was almost never the case with the Afghan army, with the Afghan police, or with the host of Afghan contractors and subcontractors that were doing things like building roads or building hospitals or building schools or whatever else. And then the way that manifested itself as a problem is that the Afghans would then be treated very badly, which would create new and different problems because then they would be offended or dishonored. And I think that's one of the reasons that we had problems starting about midway through. After, during the surge, we started having real problems with what were called green on blue incidents. And not every green on blue incident was an Afghan who felt slighted or dishonored, feeling that they had to kind of correct that wrong through badal, through vengeance, which is a perfectly appropriate thing to do in the context of their culture. But some of them were. Some of them absolutely were.
What's a green on blue incident?
Green on blue. So it comes from the NATO color scheme for units on a map. A blue unit is a friendly unit, and a green is an allied unit. So a green on blue incident is when an ally kills a blue, one of your own.
Right. No, but this is a question I wanted to ask you because there's sort of a grade inflation problem with that whole mapping system, isn't there? I mean, I remember we interviewed Daniel Ellsberg on the show a little while ago, and he talked about in his book with his experiences in Vietnam, sort of systematically marking the areas as being one level safer than they were, did that go on in Afghanistan? Was that an issue with your deployment there? Like, would you expect to find an area that was, sort of under control and have it turned out to be something else, or what was going on there? The Afghan papers talked about that, but I don't know the extent that was true.
So I wrote a piece for the New Republic, I think 3 or 4 years ago, maybe when the Afghan papers dropped. Whenever they dropped, I wrote that piece the same day for Adam Weinstein when he was contributing editor with the New Republic. And I think it's called Another Bright Shining Lie or something like that. So
after John Paul Van's book.
It was
right?
the problem. Yeah. Yes, that's right.
Or the book about him.
Right. The problem wasn't things that you couldn't, it wasn't grade inflation per se. It was 2 other things. The first of which being that each deployment was different. And I think this is actually a difference from Vietnam, because in Vietnam, units were deployed to the country and they stayed there. And so personnel turned over, but the unit was there, and there tended to be a certain degree of institutional knowledge in the country that didn't, prevent them from fucking up in all of the ways that they possibly could, and then inventing new ways to fuck up. They did. But the problem of doing 6 or 9 month deployments for the Marines, or year-long or 15 or 18-month deployments for the Army, was that the unit would go, it would be there, and then it would leave. And its metrics for assessment would reset when they would leave. So a unit would come into the territory and they would say, everything here is red or amber, which means actively hostile or dangerous. And by the time they would leave, everything was amber or green, which meant dangerous or we can go here. And then the next unit would come in and reset it to red, amber. And that happened over and over and over and over again for 20 years. So it was more like, however many units were going there, we're just constantly learning the same lessons over and over again. Things would change in a territory. Like I would say, although when we left my first deployment, I'm pretty sure all of the slides showed us as amber trending green or green. But in fact, they had probably gotten worse since we had left. We fell in on slides that said amber, amber or amber trending green or green. But by the time we left, it was probably mostly amber or amber trending red. And I can measure this because we were getting all of our resupplies in this valley from airplanes and from helicopters. Whereas in the beginning of the deployment, people would drive to us, but the Afghans got tired of getting ambushed by the Taliban or blown up by the Taliban or kidnapped by the Taliban. So they stopped doing any type of resupply missions except for fuel resupplies, when we would have to escort them with hundreds of soldiers. But my second deployment, of course, I think we even had some different colors for my second deployment. I think we threw blue and gray into the mix in addition to red, amber, and green. So there was a little bit more nuance there, but it was also, it was bad when we got there and it was good when we left. And I'm sure that unit that took over from us, downgraded them and then upgraded them.
Well, Adrian, again, thanks so much for coming on. And again, highly recommend Afghan Post, which is incidentally, it's like literarily a really interesting book. It's got a little bit of that sort of All Quiet on the Western Front kind of like lyricism to it. It's really thoughtful and really, I think, really evokes the experience of being there, which doesn't sound like it was a lot of fun, but it's a really good book about all this. So highly recommend that. And again, thanks for coming on and sharing some of your experiences with us.
Thanks so much for having me.
And there's only one place people can buy your book, The Disappointed Soldier.
Yeah, I'm going.
Sorry, disappointed purchasers. Yes.
Yeah. I'm not doing the Amazon thing. I just so much of that. You mentioned like the New York Times op-ed. I think we all know, that the way to get in the New York Times op-ed section, unless you happen to know someone, unless you've kind of, I've written one piece. And it was because of credibility and being in a place and knowing people. If you want to just drop a piece into the New York Times, you or your parents ought to have some hundreds of millions or billions of dollars, or you need to be in an institution that's connected to those individuals. And that's the sad truth of it. So nice. I'm trying to keep all of that stuff at hand's length. There's a great little local bookstore that's owned by a couple I know personally. And so they're selling it out of the bookstore. You call them, about 50% of the money goes to the bookstore directly. So it's supporting a local bookstore. It's supporting the concept of locality and knowing people and being accountable for things. And it's a pretty good book, in my estimation.
Excellent.
Thank you so much. And to hear the rest of the interview, please go to usefulidiots.substack.com.
All right, that was great.
That was great. We'll have to do a deep dive on this, Nat, because I realize some of our viewers may be too young to know how awful Dick Cheney is, or to know how much he was enriched by these wars.
Oh my God. There's a whole subplot to just the corruption side of what we were doing over there. I mean, the spending, the $2 trillion that's come out, they didn't really do any accounting on a lot of the stuff until really late in the game in Afghanistan. Like they didn't have a report that really came out about where a lot of this money went to. And I think the value of hearing stories like Adrian's is just like the absurdity of what they were having people do over there in terms of risking their lives and Afghan lives, sort of to justify money we were spending.
Yeah, it's really disgusting. I mean, I know I shouldn't be surprised, but every time I read about it, I get so angry again.
Yeah, I think we talked about the Afghan papers when they came out, but for anybody who hasn't actually read that, that story is kind of amazing on a bunch of levels, because it sort of talks about how the contracting drove the whole mission and how they were constantly changing the metrics for what success was over there, which was exactly the same thing that got us into trouble in Vietnam. We had a mission that was sort of undefined, so they just kept giving the military new ways to measure success. And originally in Vietnam, that was body counts, and then it was things like truck kills and stuff like that. And as you heard Adrian talk about, in Afghanistan, it was roads built, or it was areas that were green or amber, or it was high value targets killed, or whatever it was. But it was incoherent, and it just had no chance of really working, even assuming that we wanted it to work, right? That we actually had a reason for being there. So the whole thing is completely insane. I think people should be, especially people who had, their kids serving over there or something like that. I'm not sure how many people who are younger even know how awful it was. I think you make a good point there.
We got to have Adam McKay back on, one of your favorite guests. We should ask him, right?
Yes, we should. Absolutely. No, it's crazy. And
how many? Yeah. What are the numbers? How many people died?
So the official numbers for people who are killed in Afghanistan, it was 2,448 American service members, 3,800 American contractors, 66,000 Afghan national military and police. Other allied service members was like 1,100. And then there were estimates for Afghan civilians and Taliban fighters that, if you add it up, it's about 100,000. But I think that those last few numbers are kind of conservative. If you add it all up, 150,000, 200,000 people dead. And what was the mission really for beyond, getting bin Laden? Or really, it was the political necessity of hitting somebody after 9/11.
Right. And going to Iraq. I keep thinking that makes so much sense too, the Iraq thing. That you couldn't justify going straight to Iraq without going to the place. I mean, there were ulterior motives for Afghanistan also, but yeah.
Well, there was at least a theoretical reason to go into Iraq, into Afghanistan.
Into Afghanistan, yeah, right. Which is why people cast it as the good one, yeah. But we stayed there for so long. I still didn't think it was a good idea. And
neither did I.
It is true. There was such a split between, I feel like we were we were like the cool kids, the ones who knew from the beginning it wasn't good.
Absolutely. I mean, if you go back to 2004, if you remember, that was the big debate in the Democratic primaries. We can't have somebody who's running for office who doesn't know that the Afghanistan is the good war.
Right.
And so the nominee had to be somebody who was sort of pro-Afghanistan and waffled on Iraq. Right. Yeah. And that's how we ended up with John Kerry. But that whole split, it ruined the Democrats for 8 years during the Bush years, because it made their foreign policy totally incoherent. And then as soon as they went in and were unable to get bin Laden right away, the mission became kind of incoherent, and they stayed, they didn't get him for another 10 years.
And not even Afghanistan.
And not even in Afghanistan, and not even because of anything they did. I mean, you listen to Simon Hirsch's version of the story. It's like he was handed to us.
Oh.
But although possibly, according to the official account, it was something else. But still, it was a long time. And what were we doing there all that time? And why did we stay after that? It's like, it makes no sense. People should be really pissed about this.
Yeah, they should. Yeah.
And then there's the additional hypocrisy of people who are sort of showing up on social media and in editorial pages professing to be so outraged at the betrayal of Afghan society when they didn't have anything to say about this for 20 years.
Yeah. What about the air strikes, the civilian casualties, the drones, the CIA?
Just we gradually built up this huge force of contractors who were in the country who were going to kind of continue the war, whether we had uniformed people there or not. And then they were repeating this cycle of, we would blow something up and then there would be a funeral and then we would bomb the funeral because people would go to mourn the people we'd blown up. But we would classify those people as hostiles, even if they weren't. And all that did is it steeled the opposition to the United States, which meant we had to spend more money, which meant we had to stay there longer. And the whole thing was is this complete clusterfuck. And a lot of the pundits who are now, being bleeding hearts, oh, we should have done this or that, or we, they were nowhere to be seen when any of this was happening. Yeah. The people who were kind of all along saying, look, this is just a bad idea. We shouldn't be there.
And our allies. Then you get Tony Blair coming out, and Andrew Mitchell's like, "Well, what about our allies? Our allies are furious."
They should be. I mean, our allies have culpability too, but they should be a little bit mad too because we had no clue what we were doing in there. And
well, no, I mean with the pullout.
Oh, right, yeah.
That's what they're mad about, apparently. Yeah. And why is Tony Blair talking? Isn't he disgraced? I guess not. That's the problem. No. We got to have a hall of defamed.
It's hard to keep track of who's disgraced and why not, or why, or whatever.
Yeah.
So
we should have that, if not every show, maybe every month we put someone into our hall of fame.
Anyway, great to have Adrian on. And that was really interesting. And thanks for hanging in with us.
Yeah.
And apologies for my vacation decor, but I'll be back in my other unremarkable decor next week. So we will see you then.
Great. Bye. Make sure you rate and review, subscribe to us on Substack, usefulidiots.substack.com, subscribe and rate and review on iTunes, subscribe on YouTube, and for an extended conversation and potentially some chat about online dating, basically Katie's misadventures on online dating, go to Useful Idiots.
We should make that into a whole separate show.
Yeah, we should. Useful Idiots.
This week in Katie's online dating.
Yeah. It's going to be a tragedy. A tragic.
I think that could be like the reality show factor.
It's true. Yeah.
It could be really good. Really
you should read people should apply to go on a date with me, and then you have to approve of them.
Oh, wow.
They have to request your hand in online datage.
So am I going for funny, or am I going for actually trying to
the whole package?
Okay.
Whole package. Oh yeah, I thought you meant funny as in the person.
No. Do I want this for comic effect for the audience, or do I want to actually make this work for you?
You actually want to make it work for me. Hopefully it does both things.
Yeah. Right. Oh no, hopefully not both things, right?
I guess. Although rom-com can be funny. It doesn't, that's true. But I guess maybe there has to be, let's see. You know what? That's a good point. Good question. I have to think more about that.
Well, we'll work out the concept. Anyway, rate, review, subscribe, do all that stuff, and we will see you next week.
Bye. Hello, thank you so much for listening to and watching Useful Idiots. For full episodes and extended interviews, please subscribe at usefulidiots.substack.com. You can subscribe on YouTube at youtube.com/usefulidiots for clips, live streams, and full episodes. Also, subscribe to us wherever you find your podcast. Follow us on Twitter at UsefulIdiotPod and use the hashtag UsefulIdiotsPod. Join us Mondays at 10 a.m. for the Useful Idiots Monday Morning Show, where we discuss the Sunday morning news shows so you don't have to watch them.